if we were all in the same place, I think you'd have heard hushed silence descend, followed by rapturous applause. Please accept our sincere thanks for this extraordinarily rich lecture. I should say, friends, I'm Rachel Muirs. I'm from the School of Philosophy, Religion and History of Science, which is co-sponsoring this event, and it's my great privilege to return thanks to Frankie for her extraordinarily rich lecture. Frankie, you've woven together faith and art and emotion and science and the local and the global, and you've drawn so many threads together that I feel that you've performed the interconnection and interdependence that you spoke of in your lecture. We've been given a challenging and profound way to reread the biblical texts in the context of climate chaos, understanding disaster, understanding signs of divine wrath as held within a wider and deeper sense of moral order, of the moral order of the world, and thus also held within a larger and deeper covenant of love. And that gives a sense of the possibility of persevering through and holding to the experience of grief and lament, and receiving through it the possibility of hope. And you've given us practical and contemplative routes into finding our own new moral ecologies, which you've wonderfully described as perhaps not new in the sense of a big shiny new thing, but is new made out of something old, as well as something new and something borrowed, and something blue. I'm sure that many people here will be full of questions and comments and reflections, and we're going to pass over to those in a minute, but I get the privilege of a first question. So one of the things that I was thinking about as you spoke, I really appreciated the way in which the honesty with which you reflected on the emotional response to climate chaos and the ways in which you work through this. One of the emotional responses that wasn't to the fore in your lecture, but does often seem to be very much in the background and in the frame when we reflect on the climate emergency, is guilt or shame. It was brought to mind just earlier. There was something on the news about the prospect of guilt-free flying, right? As though kind of guilt was the biggest problem that we had to deal with, and an association of guilt with sort of failure to respond adequately to the climate emergency. And obviously that's something that we as theologians and scholars of religion deal with, as it were, see in the texts that we read, and deal with in the communities with which we engage. So I wondered if you had thoughts about the place or lack of place for guilt, the response to guilt, as part of the dynamic of how we're dealing collectively with climate emergency.
Definitely, Rachel. I mean, I think guilt is part of that package. I mean, I did talk about the need to repent, and and I think that's exactly where the Psalms take me into the full gamut of human experience, both the praise and the joy, but also that unutterable sense of the darkness of guilt and shame and anger and denial. That whole sort of, they all belong together, don't they, in some ways? And I mean, and it can be so debilitating. So I mean, I think that's really what I'm wanting to try, what I continue to struggle with, and I think that's exactly the sort of paradox of simultaneous living with, here we are as reasonably affluent people living on this planet, and the things we take for granted and our desires and our they are so they're so consumerist today, and if you just step out of that, and you can be overwhelmed by a sense of what do I do, and a real helplessness that is guilt-ridden. I want to thinking of going to Portugal, but can we fly? Should we be flying? The questions are just massive, really. And I think what we need to do is, and I think this is where Christianity and all the major religions has a really strong emphasis on transformation. So, we need to acknowledge, first of all, what we do wrong, and have that really deep sense of repentance. And then we also do need to believe that we belong within a covenant that you so beautifully summarized, that is bigger than the guilt and the darkness and the wrath and the rage, that God is there to help us through in love and grace and joy to another place. But there's always a penance too. And I think we're very good at ignoring the penance. And I think that there is a cost. We do need to think, okay, how can I replenish in some ways, what I take? I mean, that's where borrowing is actually, or stewardship is a good thing to be concentrating on. What can I do? How many trees can I plant this week? To counter what I've taken. What can I put back? And again, it's that instrumental, rationality of modernity, I would say, that, it just doesn't really think in reciprocity terms. It thinks, what can I get out of this? What's in this for me? Where am I? What's myself? How am I going to realize myself? But perhaps we need to just recalibrate that and start to think about, okay, I am interdependent here. There is reciprocity. I do need to give back. What can I give rather than what can I take? And I think that's what I try and do. I'm not very good at it, but I try, and then I have to confess that I'm not very good at it.
This is wonderful. I'm going to hand over now to Helen Reid from the Leeds Church Institute, who's going to chair the question session. I see that there are already questions or comments appearing, but Helen will manage this. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks for the introduction. So my role this evening is just to moderate the questions. We've got some come up in chat and some have come up in question and answer. If you hover on the bottom of your screen, you'll find the Q&A section. And if you could put your questions in there, I will see the ones in chat as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them to Frankie. I'll gather them together and ask them, and that's going to give a bit of thinking time. The first question, Frankie, is really one of clarification. You quoted from a book by Malcolm, I think that's Hannah Malcolm, and there were some brilliant quotations. Could you just flag up about that book, perhaps remind us of the title?
Yes, I could indeed. In fact, I'll just reach for it behind me so that people can actually see it. So it's only just come out. It's published by SCM. It's called Words for a Dying World. Hannah Malcolm is currently training for Anglican priesthood in Durham, and she's doing a PhD exactly on eco-grief. She won the Slam Prize, the Church Times Slam Prize, I think last year, or 2019, I think it was. And she's really engaged with this. And what's wonderful about this book is that it gathers voices, as I try to reflect, from across the world, and really does take seriously the emotional responses, which I really do think we need to be doing to climate catastrophe. So there we are, Words for a Dying World. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to draw two questions together. One was talking about the apocalyptic language that gets used about a dying world and disaster, and that perhaps we've been hearing this for a generation or more about our planet. And I would like to say, I'd like to link that to another question that's come, that's really, when you talk about new order, in what sense is it a new eschatological order? I think those two questions go together.
Okay. Right. So the first question, just remind me, Helen, was about, we've heard this all before, sort of thing. Is that really what?
We've heard all these apocalyptic warnings about disaster before.
Okay. Well, we have. I mean, I think it's taken a long time for the media and for, cultural commentators not to think, oh, we've got to balance, someone who's saying it's all disastrous with a climate change denier. And I think only recently, and thanks to Greta Thunberg, I think that a sense of urgency has really emerged. So yes, we might have heard it all before, but I think that there's lots of evidence that feedback loops and even the way lots of viruses, viruses have jumped, and here we are living in the latest way in which humanity has been exotic in its relationship with other species. I do think that we need to think about this with a real degree of urgency and take things seriously. And if things don't come out as we fear, then all the better, But let's not. Let's go with the benefit of wisdom. Let's just think it's going to go with worst case scenarios, and if they don't come true, then that's great. Eschatological order. I think it's very hard to understand how it might be that God, who has created this beautiful planet, would will it to come to an end through anthropogenic reasons. I mean, I think if, as we look forward to Christ coming again, or to the end of the second coming and the end of creation, that's in God's hands, it seems to me. And if humanity, through anthropogenic reasons, is causing the end of the planet, that seems to me to be ultimately hubris, ultimately sinful, that we're abrogating to ourselves that which is God's. This is God's creation, not ours, and it's God who sustains us, and God sustained it, will sustain it until God decides that that the eschaton is upon us. So I think we are still living in the secular time, in the old sense of the word, of the in-between time, the age in between, in the middle of things. And it seems to me that we can know that deep order. We can't know the eschaton. And however we might imagine it, I am certain that it is not that we end up as a red planet, as Mars, which I think is the way that potentially we are heading. So I hope that answers that question. Thinking on the top of my, I think it's a very real question. It is one I have thought about. It's a difficult question, though.
It is a difficult question. And also the question as it was asked did also say, would you see that looking ahead to a new eschatological order, would you see that as in tension with the lament about what's happening now and looking back at lost order? Or would you see that as a contradiction or a continuum?
I would have to say that I don't know. I mean, I really don't know what. I'm sort of thinking about the end of The Last Battle, the C.S. Lewis Narnia books, and just how Narnia comes to an end into an even more beautiful and glorious world, and that's possibly what's going to happen. I just don't think we can know what the end of all things is, and if we believe in God, it seems ultimately that has to be in God's hands, and we need to trust what the present holds, and trust that the future will be as full of grace as only God can provide. I think it's I come back. I think it's a hard question, and I'm chary of thinking too much about that, because actually I think that we can also use that as a distraction from the real engagement that we need to be doing really now to save as much as we can of this fragile earth which God has given us, with all its diversity and deep order and deep song.
Thank you. I think that's a great answer, and linking in that activism as well. I think that's really brought it together. A bit of a different kind of question now. We've been pointed out that covenant, as you use it, is a specifically Christian response and perhaps more than that as well, older than Christian. But do you feel that using the concept of covenant could create barriers for talking about these issues with people of other faiths?
I don't think so, because I actually think covenant, I mean, yes, of course, I've traced it back into the Judeo, roots, but actually why I used, that sort of something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, is that actually we all make covenants with each other all the time. They're the sort of commitments and promises that make life possible. There are responsibilities that we make and share with other people. And that's universally, that's universal to humankind. I don't think there's any culture that doesn't take, promises and commitments seriously to one to another. So I'd be very happy to move out of, my faith tradition and say that very clearly, that actually, our commitments to each other are fundamental. But yes, so let's extend that to our commitments to the natural world around, and to our future generations with whom we have commitments, and to the past and to the present. So these are covenants, these are commitments that are time framed as well. And what is our commitment to my grandchildren? Well, actually, I have got, they're not yet born, but they're I do feel committed to leaving them with a world that's habitable, well, as far as I can. So yes, I don't think that's insurmountable, that language.
Yeah, so that you can speak in a distinctively Christian way, but into perhaps a broader understanding of covenant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which I think anyone of faith or any faith or no faith would understand.
Great. And someone else has asked, could you tell us a little bit more about the place of hope in this understanding as we head for ecological collapse?
Well, I hope that hope was throughout the talk. Actually, I think it's hope quite hard won, because it's not a false hope that or easy optimism. Hope isn't easy optimism, and I don't think we're in a place of easy optimism. I think we're in a place of really quite dark pessimism, actually, if we really study and understand what might lie ahead. And so our hope needs to be realistic. And again, I'm hoping that came through, that there's a paradoxical holding together of fear and hope. Those two ancient, they're often linked, aren't they? Fear and hope. I think we need to be holding them together and working hard at holding them together, because sometimes the fear, as I've described, can be overwhelming, and the hope very, very little indeed. But we can't live without hope. While I breathe, I hope. So we need to work hard at practices, and sometimes actually developing. One of the books I published recently, called Full of Character, has a chapter on hopefulness, where actually you can develop practices and habits of hopefulness, so that you actually train yourself to see hope rather than despair. And it's a bit like cognitive behavioral therapy, if you like, that when the dark thoughts come, you put them in a box, and you actually get out into nature and you plant something, or you just try and that certainly works for me. It won't work for everyone, but there will be something for everyone, that immersing yourself in a good novel, or finding something that actually holds you into life and holds you into the next day and the next step ahead. I think despair is the opposite of hope, isn't it? It's to live without hope, and we can't. So I hope was throughout the talk, because that's exactly what my struggle has been, is to how can I hope with a future that looks as bleak as it does? Well, there are ways. And for each of us, it's exactly what a moral ecology looks like, is finding hope. It's the most basic thing, I think. I hope that answers the question. Again, it's a difficult question, but please feel that you're not struggling alone as well, because I think that's the other thing, is that, one of the things that Greta Thunberg has done is she's enabled people to start talking about how they really feel. And I think particularly young people today, she's given a voice to thousands and millions of people who realize we're not alone, and that's so important too. It's part of that interconnectedness and interdependence that I was talking about earlier.
Well, I think hope has come through in your lecture, and I think that sticks with me about the it being a habit. So it's an idea, something we can aspire to. I'd like to take two questions now together. I think that they've got some similarities. And this is about how the fact that this has been a struggle and a threat for quite a while in society. And someone who said, what a fantastic, imaginative and challenging lecture, and comes on to this question, that it's such a huge challenge to reverse the trends of compulsory consumerism that you mentioned. Well, how do we break through the significant levels of resistance to facing those challenges?
I think we start with ourselves, actually. I mean, and hopefully the personal becomes political if people, I do think we need to recalibrate our desires, and so much of our desires are shaped and nurtured is the wrong word, but certainly shaped by advertising and the capitalist society in which we live. And I think resisting that and thinking to ourselves as we walk around Tesco's or wherever, actually, I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need that stuff that I would normally put into my shopping trolley. And I do think lockdown has enabled us to recalibrate a bit. I'm a bit quite skeptical, really, but we probably will just go straight. Well, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to go straight back into those those old patterns of buying weight. I mean, it's really complex, isn't it? Because single-use plastic was actually beginning slowly to decrease a little bit before lockdown, but now all these lateral flow tests are full of single-use plastic. I mean, there's just so much more of it now. But I think we just being mindful of what we consume and mindful of what the cost of it and where the cost is being borne of our consumers lifestyle. That's a start, and just trying to make do with less and make do and mend as well, which does take us back to an older generation. It's for each of us, I think, to work that out for ourselves. I mean, I know people who use chest freezers, or have adapted chest freezers to become fridges, so that all the electricity or the warmth doesn't fall out every time the doors open. It's little things like that if we can use our imaginations just to find ways, and it feels good too. And I think setting ourselves the task of a change a week, of a little lifestyle change, that's the way in which we form habits that then change our attitudes, and our attitudes then become different people with different desires. And it's not easy, but again, I think it's necessary, really. But I think we've got to be gentle with ourselves too, and take one step at a time.
Thank you. Yes, and I think that links to something Andrew Pearson was saying in chat, that was really about when we make these changes, it's about, can we be a role model as well, and can we encourage other people by the choices we make? So
hello, Andrew. Well, I think it's the same Andrew. I think we trained together at Westcott, so that's very nice. Absolutely. And if you're in any leadership role, then that's the opportunity to speak out and actually really to set an example, and to motivate others to think imaginatively, and to think expansively about what we could do.
Great. Just got time, I think, for two questions that I've got here. One is quite a short one, and it starts with a statement. So it's referring to, you showed some wonderful images at the end of the blue planet Earth, and saying it's an iconic photo of the modern age. Is modernity all bad?
No, of course it isn't. Of course not. I think modernity is something that a lot of people are thinking about at the moment, what it means, and have been for a while, actually, probably since 1972, when the postmodern condition was first published. No, and and human beings are innovative creatures. We and curious. So we're always going to be thinking and expanding and wanting the new things in life. So, but on the other hand, it can get out of hand, and I think it has got out of hand. And I think that we need to also use the things that perhaps come through traditions, which are more habitual ways of thinking through, to work out what we value and how we can assess the sort of costs of, say, new scientific endeavour, and we haven't asked those questions enough, I think, in the modern age. Again, it's an enormous question. I could go on and on and on and on about maternity because it's something I'm really interested in. But I do think it's worth just stopping in our tracks a little bit and saying, why am I so seduced by the new? And because actually we are captured in so many ways, and our desires are very, very moulded by market forces and ways which I think we should be a lot more canny about how we are shaped in our desires. It's a very good book by Mark Clavier on this, on consumerism and Augustine and desire. I can't remember the title. It's a complicated title, but it's very good on this. So I would recommend that as a book to read, another book to read.
Good, great to know you're recommending more books. And we've had another question come through, which I think you've slightly answered there. There's a lot of interest in modernity and what are the particular challenges. I'm going to put two questions together. One is a general one about Christian values that shape our understanding of sustainable living, but also saying, would you say that you're influenced perhaps by some of Pope Francis's Encyclical Ardartocy, which does have resonance with a lot of things that you were saying?
It does, absolutely. I think that came out in 2015, didn't it? And it was an absolutely crucial document of a Christian statement about environmentalism and climate catastrophe. I think it has had a lot of very good press, probably not enough. I think one of the really interesting things about Laudato Si is the way it recognises that the churches and all the great religions actually are global communities, and we do need global action. I mean, the problems that face our blue planet are global problems, and we need global responses. And the churches and other religions working together are an incredible arena for that sort of action. So, and Pope Francis, living up to his name, is absolutely leading the way. And I know there's many people who recognise that as very, very important. Yes, I didn't actually refer to it directly, but I'm familiar with it, and disagree with anything he says, of course. Yeah.
Great. And perhaps just one question finally slipping just before 10 to when I was planning to finish the questions. And so Jemima Parker's saying, that at one time we wanted to talk very much about stewardship, and perhaps that's a managerial term. And would it be more helpful to use different language, such as looking to Christ for our role as servants in this context?
I still quite like the word steward, just in terms of, well, I mean, we could go back into the Benedictine tradition, couldn't we, and think about the cellarer. The cellarer was a role in, it still is a role in Benedictine communities, of the person who looked after all the goods. So there's something, and also the other word I'm thinking about actually in my mind is economy, because economy is the ordering of the household affairs. Is one way in which you could translate the original word economy, echo, which is the home, and nomos, which is rule or order. So it's that sort of sense of good husbandry. I guess that's another word that you could use. So I think there are a range of different words, and there are biblical parables. Jesus, I am the vine dresser. I am the good shepherd, which again is caring for and ensuring that being a good steward, being a good carer of the resources that we have, in order that they are enabled to flourish. That's a very basic. And so I think servanthood, I think to my mind, servant doesn't have the same sort of sense of responsibility. A servant is someone who does what someone else wants them to do. We could get into a debate about that, but if we take that as what a servant does, then I think the sense of responsibility needs to be there. And a good servant obviously will have that responsibility if they're given the responsibility. But I think there's a sense in which stewardship has responsibility written into it, which I think is really important, that we embrace that. That makes sense.
Yes, Thank you, Frances. Thank you for the lecture and for your engagement with the wide range of questions and responses that arose from it.
It's been great. It's been lovely. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for those questions. They're fantastic.
Thank you. Now, if we'd been able to hold this event at the Minster, as we usually do for the Hook Lecture, there would have been a bookstall with copies of Frances's 2 most recent books for sale. As it is, all I can do is let you know you can contact Frances directly using this email to request a book and arrange payment. Full of Character is £10, including post and packing, and Like There's No Tomorrow is £15. I would highly recommend both these books. I think they offer insight into the key themes of the lecture tonight, into themes of education and of responses to climate grief. They're both thoughtful and accessible and recommended reading. On that basis, if you would like to join a discussion about the book Like There's No Tomorrow, please do consider joining us at Oakwood Church Book Club in June. The event may be online or in person. We're waiting to see what will be appropriate near at the time. So if you would register your interest with Leeds Church Institute, that would be great, and we'll keep you in touch. Looking further ahead, I'm pleased to say that we will be offering a second public lecture this year. As Hook 22 was put forward to April 2021, it's now a mere 5 months until the next Hook lecture. And I'm delighted that Dr. Carmody Gray, Assistant Professor of Catholic Theology at Durham University, will be giving the lecture. Carmody spoke at a Faith Leaders and Climate Change event here in Leeds a couple of years ago. Some of you may remember that. It was an inspiring night. And when she returns, Carmody will be speaking again about environmental issues and faith and community preparations for COP26. So all that remains is for me to thank you all for coming along this evening, for joining us at our first ever virtual book lecture. It's been really memorable. So thank you all and good night.